get going. I've just hit record. We'll do a quick around the horn here. There are some members of our board who are new and want to make sure that everyone's got a chance to introduce themselves. And so I will start. I'm Lauren. I'm the editor, relatively new editor at the Tribune, started in December 2020. George, you are to my right on Zoom.
I'm never to anybody's right. I'm George Pyle. I'm the opinion page editor of the Salt Lake Tribune, not so new.
I'll jump in. I'm Tim Fitzpatrick, Senior Director of Public Outreach and Operations, and happy to see you again, Mayor Mendenhall.
And I'm Holly Mullen, representing the Tribune Board of Directors on the editorial board. Thank you, Mayor, for coming this morning.
And I'm Scott Anderson, a community member of the board, and it's good to see you, Mayor. Thank you for being with us.
And Taylor remains anonymous.
Oh yes, Taylor Stevens, we know each other well. Erin, from my days covering the city, separate from the editorial board, not here as either board member or editorial board, but as a reporter, and good to see you both.
Well, Lindsay Nicola, you could introduce yourself if you'd like, of course.
Used to just staying in the background and things like this, but I'm Lindsay Nicola. I am Mayor Mendenhall's Director of Communications.
Thank you. And I'm happy to be here with you all. It was a whole year ago, a very full year ago, that I last connected with you all, but it was through Zoom even then on Earthquake Day. So how appropriate, I suppose, that here we are with a very robust year under our belts and meeting again. We should do it more often, though.
We would love that. Thank you. Thank you for joining. The floor is yours, please. We're eager to hear a little bit more about your priorities and what you're looking to focus on in the foreseeable future.
Sure, and I appreciate the opportunity to jump in. Usually you start pelleting me with questions and we consume an hour, but this is a welcome shift, maybe to talk about some of the top items on my desk at the moment, and with the work of our more than 3,000 employees at Salt Lake City, which is focused very much around an equitable and evolutionary recovery. We've been talking about not going back to the way things were as we come out of the pandemic, but I think most, at least just as important and probably even more so, is that we take the momentum of the social movement that came up after the murder of George Floyd, and we couple that with the investment and the focus that we have right now on an equitable recovery from the economic effects and the community effects of the pandemic. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity in these crises that have happened. And certainly there are plenty of gaps in our systems. There are needs in the community that have been there for generations. But the experience of all that we have been through and are still going through, I think, shines a light and exacerbates, worsens many of these critical needs in the community that have been largely unmet until 2020. So most immediately is the incredible investment from the federal government with the American Rescue Plan Act, and that $87 million in funding that is coming directly to Salt Lake City. I see it as the slingshot that can thrust us forward into that future we've been talking about. Not about going back to the way things were, but how do we get there? Well, this $87 million in community investment that we're preparing to make with the community will help us, I think, to rebuild structures anew, not the way they were necessarily, and to listen and engage with all our diverse communities across Salt Lake City and figuring out how we best invest in their futures. So the work that we've done with the CARES Act dollars over 2020 has with these community organizations and different entities that we normally engage with through CDBG dollars or HUD dollars have been informative as to where, what we couldn't fund, what they didn't have capacity for. And so it's not an entirely new conversation to begin this $87 million unpacking. But so we've been informed by that. And I think the digital equity work is another critical and fundamental infrastructure aspect of both the recovery and the future success of our marginalized and disproportionately impacted communities in Salt Lake City. So we've begun the process internally to determine how to allocate those dollars. And as you know, the first half will be coming in the next 6 weeks or so. We don't have a firm date just yet. We're still awaiting some of the technical guidance from the Treasury on exactly how we can spend the dollars. But what we do know is that it will be far more flexible than the CARES Act dollars we received previously, even allowing us in some ways to replace lost revenue to the city, which turns out to be the way we administer programs, and we can fund our employees to do the work that they do. But our strategy in spending those dollars, and I'm sorry, I mentioned the first half will come shortly, and then it will be 1 year later, approximately, we'll receive the second batch of dollars. So that equitable economic recovery and providing really stability and opportunity with every dollar for our residents is our focus. We also want to make sure that our city employees are taken care of. And when I started the job in January of 2020, we had 3 main pillars of focus around equity and inclusion and belonging in the city for our residents, environmental resiliency, and really building opportunity, getting more out of the growth that happens in our city, and making those tangible connections between the growth that's happening and the benefits to our community, whether those are direct job opportunity benefits, reinvestment in the communities, community guided investment from the growth that's happening. Those were our 3 main focuses. But going through 2020 and in looking at these future investments, there's a 4th pillar on our stool, so to speak, which is supporting our city family. So city services for our employees and our residents will also be a focus of those recovery dollars for us. We could talk about homelessness. And today, as you may know, there is a resource fair focused on the Rio Grande area as part of our community commitment program that we launched in November with 14 additional organizations that I think it's been an evolution of how homeless services are rendered in the city, where we used to come together one day a year at the Salt Palace and do a massive resource fair there, opening the doors at the Salt Palace, inviting people to come in and connect with driver's license opportunities, maybe find out about their benefits, housing opportunities, shelter opportunities, mental health experts, and justice court. We've taken that one-day service and mobilized it out to where the large encampments are in the city, which is a continuously fluid and dynamic situation, as it has been for all of our lifetimes in Salt Lake City, but is a larger population throughout 2020 and still than we've seen, I think, ever in the past. So the rendering of these services where people are at has been something that I think has been incredibly beneficial. We've had about almost 200 individuals engaged in these conversations with these 14 service providers. We've made placement offers to about 130 people, and about half of those people, 52, took up the bed and shelter offers, and 4 have taken up detox placement offers. And 2 people were identified as being involved in human trafficking. And fortunately, those service providers were able to directly connect those individuals with trauma-informed care that is specific to the needs that go along with human trafficking. So we intend, and I'm working right now in the budget that I'm putting together for our city council, to make permanent the community commitment program. It's a big ask of the partner agencies. You know, we've all just grown our or spread our work investment without each of these agencies necessarily having any extra funding to do so, but found that the opportunity to meet people where they're at and offer these specific services to them is critical. And of course, the other piece of the community commitment program is ensuring that our public spaces are safe and clean and welcoming to everyone. Our residents who are housed, our residents who are unhoused, the visitors to the community, people coming into town to patronize our businesses. Public spaces need to be safe and clean for all of our residents. And so the 2 to 3 weeks of individual engagement resource fair kind of culminates the 2 to 3 weeks of engagement. And then the Salt Lake County Health Department comes in to do the cleanup or the abatement of the large encampment areas at the end there. So in a long way, that's that resource fair is what's happening today at Rio Grande. And I think beginning tomorrow, they'll begin to close and clean that area to camping. We had a fire at the Fleet Block, and there's been incredible amount of voices from our community that want to be engaged in the future of the Fleet Block, what it is, how it gets transformed, what happens with the art that's at the Fleet Block, and recognition for the community focus that and the heart that has gone into creating a space for our many communities who are and have been mourning for the loss of their loved ones for a long time. So although the city council is continuing to consider it a rezone for the area, this year we're going to be releasing, the city will be releasing a request for information, which is a way that we engage the community at large, asking for their ideas and how we imagine the possible transitions for the Fleet Block with the community asset integration, public space, gathering spaces, green space, and how much we can have there, access to opportunities from apprenticeships, internships, housing opportunities, services. There's 100 million ways that people can come up with, and that's the request that we'll be making to the community shortly to help us through that and the public process that will follow. So another thing that I think stems off of these conversations around homelessness for me is around tiny homes and our very ambitious goal to have a pilot tiny home community open this coming winter, which is a tremendous timeline. But we've been engaging stakeholders in the community since December around a few focused work sessions, trying to get some the best minds that we can in these areas to give us some foundational elements around land use and the issues right now that we would face, as tiny homes currently aren't even allowed in the zoning of the city, and a myriad of other considerations. The financing, both the capital upfront and the ongoing operational aspects of it, and the services. How do we integrate the rest of the community and volunteerism and individual case management needs into the pilot program to make it be as successful as possible? So those meetings, we had one yesterday, they're happening right now. And ultimately, I think that the tiny home community has to be developed in coordination with the other homeless services that there are. And that's a fundamental piece of this, that we be able to grow the system with our homeless resource centers that's working so well for so many right now, but isn't, I believe, reaching the chronically homeless population in the ways that we have the potential to as a city, really as a statewide community. So my goal is that our tiny home pilot project be a template that can potentially be expanded in the future here, but absolutely be expanded to other areas and other communities in the region and throughout the state. Do you want me to keep talking, Lauren? I could go to police reform.
You know what? Thank you so much, Erin. I'm pretty sure that the board has some thoughts and questions, and Taylor may as well, on some of the issues you just covered. And we could certainly then pivot back to giving you some time to talk through where you're at on police reform. And then if there are questions, kind of use that workflow, but perhaps transition to a bit of a Q&A now would be great. I will open it up to the board. I know we had a bit of a discussion around housing, affordable housing, gentrification, homelessness as well. So if the board has questions or specific inquiries that it would like to make on that topic or on those topics, now is a great time. Let's do that.
Well, Mayor, this is Scott. I'd like to ask you your thoughts on this recent legislative session and the bills that were passed that have set up a new governance structure for the state for homelessness, and the money that's been provided for homelessness and affordable housing, and the council that will be established. And I'm just curious, your thoughts on that. Will that help the city? Have you been involved in that? And are you supportive, or do you have some concerns from the city's point of view?
I am supportive, and I was grateful to be a part of the longer term process that happened mostly over the course of the summer with the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute, asking the questions about how might a governance structure be put together that would be most beneficial for meeting homeless services primarily, but supporting and bringing some consensus to those that currently exist in the cities who host them, and counties as well. So I think who that person is will be very critical to the success of the system's ability to come together and have the kind of unified voice of the need and where we're going, so that our major donors can continue to feel confident in supporting this. And of course, we would love to see a greater focus in terms of consistency from the state of Utah on the state's role in homelessness. As the capital city, we have always been, and we are happy to continue to be the nexus of services for the state. But we do not have the capacity really to handle the state's homeless population that is brought here by cities throughout the state of Utah. And I know council members in Salt Lake City and myself have had personal conversations with other city folks around the state who have said, we do, if we have a homeless individual here, we will bring them to Salt Lake City. We'll help them pack up their things and drop them off at Pioneer Park or wherever seems best, because that's where the services are. And I think it's done. I hope it's done with that well-meaning, but the reality is we don't have the ability, we don't have the financial ability to support the state's homeless population as a city. So that being said, the investment of hundreds of millions of dollars, and I have to thank you, Scott Anderson, for being such a critical part of that in the preservation of existing affordable housing in the state, and certainly in the city, is a game changer for us. With our state's fastest growing population in the nation, incredible economy, and prospects of recovery, we are going to continue to see, I think, incremental, at least, growth in our homeless population, and pressures on our housing stock, which we have been facing for a very long time, almost 2 decades, in the intense way that we have been. And so preservation of what is existing is a no-brainer part. It's cheaper for us, frankly, to preserve housing that exists today than try to recreate it later with our precious taxpayer dollars and trying to create zoning to increase those amounts. We're going to do both, though. They run parallel. So we've invested just over 22 million as a city in housing just in the last year. 12.2 million of that was for rental assistance, and just under $500,000 was for mortgage assistance. And by the way, that breakout was informed by Jim Wood's work with the Policy Institute. And then 4.1 million of that was for homeless services and neighborhood support. And we saw the creation of just over 300 affordable units, thanks to the RDA's affordable housing investment just in the last year. So gentrification mitigation is the way, the city nerd way that we are going to be approaching that preservation, not only the preservation of housing units and the built infrastructure, but the preservation of the heart and the culture that exists in what have been historically resilient neighborhoods in Salt Lake City. But because of these tremendous population growth and economic pressures are moving out, their market forces are pressuring out these communities that we value and we want to support. So that gentrification mitigation plan is going to be created this year. It'll be done hand in hand with and by the community with Salt Lake City. So I think we need to keep moving all of these efforts on parallel tracks. And I am very hopeful about the new governance structure with the state.
Mayor, kind of a follow-up to Scott's follow-up. I think what you mentioned a few minutes ago about neighboring cities basically telling people to come here who need homeless services and resources, I think many residents would find that rather galling. And I guess my question is, how can neighboring cities, some of whom have been very vocal about not wanting to put homeless shelters in their cities or that kind of thing, how do you get them, or how do we get them on board and to sort of share this responsibility?
Well, I know that is I understand that to be part of the mandate of this new position in the governor's office, to bring the state along with the state as a whole, along with the realities of our homeless needs. But I think one of the best ways immediately that myself, our council members, and my work with the Utah League of Cities and Towns to begin making progress on that, what I predict to be a pretty continuously growing population of people experiencing homelessness, is working with cities to make bigger investments to keep people in their housing. And those kind of investments partially we could fund through CARES Act dollars that came through our counties and through some of the cities last year. But that needs to be, I believe, a perpetual investment that cities across the state consider, keeping people in housing. And quite similar to the wisdom of that investment as it relates to the preservation of existing affordable housing is the cost savings. If we really just if we have to talk about it from an economic standpoint, not the humanitarian crisis that it is, but from an economics, and when it comes to your budget as one of the other 260 plus cities in the state, you should be investing in keeping your residents in their housing, because ultimately the cost of them losing their housing, the impacts on the children's trajectory of changing schools from move after move, and the investments we make to get people restabilized are tremendously greater than helping to stabilize families and communities where they're at.
Mayor, do we need another shelter?
I believe we do need another shelter in the state of Utah. And we anticipate, I'm hoping this week or quite soon, we may have the results from the point in time count that happened in January. But the anecdotal experience, as we hear it from the partners with the community commitment program and at the doors of the resource centers themselves, is that the need is greater. There are more people on the street. And I think one of those realities, as I said, even with our strong economy and our very strong population growth, will be an increased need to accommodate people experiencing homelessness, unless we make a greater investment and focus in that stabilization of families and individuals before they have to enter the doors of the Homeless Resource Center. And as a city, we are doing that now, but I would love to see a greater emphasis on those resources throughout the state.
Erin, back in 2017, I think it was a few years ago, you were saying the same thing, that, you didn't think that these resource centers were going to meet the demand. We covered that extensively, that there was a reduction in beds and mats from the old road home to the new resource system. Like, who do we lay this blame on? Because this has been well reported for years that this was going to be a problem, and now, we're living it.
Well, Taylor, I will leave it to you as the journalist and to the paper to lay blame, but as a mayor, I'd rather be pulling from the data that led to the conversation that really County Mayor Ben McAdams started years ago, and a couple of years before that 2017 conversation about what do we know the need is and what are we tracking to tell us when we need more. We as a city, and back in 2017 as a council member, I also recall asking for an online database, some way that we can see what those needs are on a day-to-day basis and what the available resources are. Are there beds available? And what's the one-stop way to find out if you can connect with shelter services? That never was created until our administration came along, and I'll give credit to Lindsay Nicola and her communications team for helping not only to get the data from the HIMIS system, but to build the relationship, I think, of trust between the organizations and the city to be the convener of that information. And today we have a homeless services dashboard where you can check the availability or rather the percentage of beds available on the previous night. And that's the best that we can do at this point, because it's not our data and they're not our homeless resource centers, but that, I think, transparency about what the demands are on the system and where the system is falling short are our best paths to create the conversation around additional homeless resource centers.
Are the homeless resource centers adequately funded?
Certainly not from an operational perspective. And I believe that was part of the motivation from the state legislature and from all of the many donors who contribute to keeping the system going, to say, how are we going to continue operating these shelters with the funding that we need? And who is the entity or the person that's going to lead us in the frank and visionary conversation of where we're going to take that funding and those services in the future. So that position in the governor's office will, I think, be leading that. And again, whoever that turns out to be is going to be very critical to the success of this new system.
And it will need more funding?
Well, the real cost of providing those services every single day at the homeless resource centers will always need funding. This is hands-on social work, case management, keeping these facilities safe from a COVID perspective. In addition to that, has placed an ever increased burden on the operational aspects of it. So yes, everything costs more every year.
And that really does need to come from the state?
The state, and I will not hesitate to thank the philanthropic community, who have been a major source of that funding for a very long time. And I hope that we, as a system, we will be able to continue and grow their trust so that they can continue to help as well.
Mayor, thanks. I'd love to move on, as I'm realizing our time is short here. We've got about just 15 minutes to cover any number of topics. You mentioned police reform. There were a number of questions from readers with respect to where you are and whether you are considering changing funding allocations and so on and so forth as we look at our relationships between our communities and law enforcement. So we'd love to ask you for your perspective on that now. Thanks.
Sure. Our police department underwent the most aggressive set of police reforms in our city's history last year. They were put into place early September and trained up over the following weeks there. And I've asked our chief of police, Mike Brown, to put together a report, which will be coming out later. I was going to say this month, but in April, that takes a frank look at what those reforms have played out like in the data that we collect, what kind of case evidence we might have for the effects of these reforms. And I've encouraged him and his team to, produce these data as they are. Have there been changes? That's really the question. It's not show me that there've been changes, but let's start tracking this in perpetuity so that we can see over time what the effects of the reforms are. The Commission on Racial Equity and Policing issued their first set of recommendations several weeks ago, and we know that they're continuing and they'll be producing more recommendations to the City Council and myself as we go forward. But the fundamental work of keeping our city safe, whether you're a visitor, a resident, unhoused or housed, you run a business here, you're visiting family, it is every city's fundamental job to keep the people safe. And being able to answer those calls through 911 when people are in crisis and in need of first responder help is the work that we need to do, but we're doing it with slightly decreased patrol staff. And that was covered at the end of the 2020 calendar in the media quite a bit. But just in order for us to meet those calls for service, we need to have enough police officers to do so. And in addition, the co-responder model that we run with our social workers in the police department who respond with an officer with people in crisis is a program that I would like to see grown, and growing our ability in terms of a 24-hour calendar to meet those needs, because people experiencing mental health crisis don't necessarily have those experiences from a 9-to-5 schedule, and we need to be able to respond where we are doing our very best now. And there've been some recent examples that I think I'd love to share with you one if you are interested. I think that exhibit the reforms. There's an individual that our officers know fairly well. They're aware of his having autism, and that he had a few exchanges of calling 911 a couple of weeks ago and expressing some desires for the police department to come and end his life. Of course, our police department did not go out and meet him where he was asking to be met. And one night, this was in our watch log, he came to the public safety building recently, and it was middle of the night. Our police officers were trained in December on the Culture City training, which we talked about then, which is an education program. It's never been done with a police department in the nation. It's been done with NBA stadium employees, and now working with NFL stadium employees on how to engage in a safe and productive way with people who are on the spectrum when they may be experiencing a mental health crisis or in that moment. So the officers responded in a way when this person presented outside the doors of the public safety building with that training in the forefront of their mind. They had to block off the street. They did not turn their flashing lights on. So because the lights they knew may trigger him, they kept their voices at an even, calm tone without shouting. It was one officer's idea to maybe use the strobe function on the flashlight to disorient him enough that they could approach him and take him into custody. And that was immediately vetoed by the other officers, not wanting to trigger him with the lights. And it was resolved safely. And the officers, when I thanked them for the way that they conducted themselves after reading the watch log, said to me, this was because of our Culture City training that we knew, and it wasn't just one of us, but all of the officers who were there that night knew what we needed to do to mitigate the potential of triggering this individual and having it become a tragic incident. Those are the kind of experiences that are happening week after week with our police officers on our streets, where the reform work that's happening and with the Commission on Racial Equity Policing, along with the Culture City training that's taken place and that we'll redo annually, is having an impact, a positive impact on the way that policing's happening. So I think you'll see more of those examples in the report that the police department will be coming out with in April.
So do
Erin,
you have enough officers? I'm sorry, go ahead, Taylor.
oh, your question's out there.
Do you have enough officers? And if not, why not?
We need more officers. I just attended the graduation of a class of 11 officers on Friday. And we are working with the City Council and the Commission on Racial Equity and Policing to talk about bringing on a lateral class, we hope, in the future, near future, which really means hiring officers who have already been trained from other police departments so they can hit the ground running. And we would like to bring in a full class in the future because we are not able to meet those 911 call needs from people in this city the way that I believe we need to, and the way I know our police officers want to be able to respond. So we're still, we're building back, but the good news is that there are actually a great many people who are interested and have expressed interest to the police department through the normal system of saying, when you begin to hire, please let me know because I want to become a police officer. And we have a great many who are interested in joining our department.
In a related question, Erin, we reported late last year about some increases in violent crime in Salt Lake City. How are things looking with that? Have you seen that continue, or are we seeing the violent crime decline?
Yeah, we have, we partnered, as you know, with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Utah Department of Public Safety and the U.S. Marshal's Office, and wanted to take a surgical approach on the crime reduction in the city. And that approach was to focus on community impact cases. So as of the middle of March, this pursuit of focusing on people committing felonies who have a history of community-wide or community impacted criminal activity that has largely been unaddressed because of the limitations in the judicial system through the pandemic. We are focusing on those community impact individuals. And as of just 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, we had 45 defendants who've been charged just from Salt Lake City. And those cases resulted in as many guns and thousands of grams of drugs. So we are going to continue with this partnership. And I want to give a shout out to John Huber, who's no longer our U.S. attorney here in Utah, but was fundamental in helping me create this partnership. We'll keep it going and we'll have an update. We're building a dashboard on the police website, similar to the dashboards that exist at the community level, to be tracking the work around this.
Are all 45 still in jail?
Yes, so that's the difference. They're held as U.S. cases. They're part of the U.S. Marshal system. They're not from the police department. And so they have the contracts with multiple jails where they hold them until trial.
Mayor, one of the things that COVID has brought to the forefront is public education. And the debate here in Salt Lake City is strong on how we should teach and deliver education in person, virtually. And as an ex officio member of the school board here, what's your position and what type of leadership are you trying to bring to the council?
To the council or the board of education?
Yeah, the school board.
Well, I'm looking forward to the forthcoming leadership of Dr. Gadsden, who will be our superintendent the beginning of July, and his experience in different parts of the country of leading what he will be leading here is the capital city school district that needs an urbanized approach to rendering education. I have kids in the school district. My son didn't go back to in-person learning when West High School became available for that again, based on his own decision for his health and safety. And I have appreciated that flexibility as a parent. And I'm a city's nerd here. I'm a fan of local decision making, and we have a legislature who often claims to be a fan of local decision making, but wants to take away local decision making when it's different from their opinion. And I support our school district in having that local conversation with the board members, who I think, frankly, are underpaid and understaffed. They really hardly get paid at all for their work on the school board, and don't have sufficient staff, in my opinion, to accommodate the robust conversations that they have the duty to make decisions on as a school board. But that said, I think they've done the best that they can. And as a parent, I'm glad that my child has the choice of whether or not he can continue with his virtual learning. But when it comes down to what we can do as a city, because we are an absolutely distinct entity from the school district, we have grown, and we're going to continue to grow our youth city programming, which grew from an after-school subsidized, awesome STEM focused and arts focused program to full day, so that students in Salt Lake City who don't have a home situation where it was easy for them to go to school virtually could come to Youth City. We've grown that programming on the west side of Salt Lake City, where we have more students per capita than any other part. And we're going to continue to grow that programming. But the best part, I think, Scott, is this window of opportunity that is still open for us, both as a local community and at a national level, to bring in community partners, corporate partners, the mentorship and talent that exists in Salt Lake City, and infuse it into the youth population. And we intend to do that through Youth City programming. So when I talk about tangibly connecting opportunities for our residents to the growth that's happening here and to the investments we're making in our recovery, that's an example of how we intend to do that. We want to take your willingness as a community, and I don't mean just you, Scott, but of course you're welcome, and connect that talent and passion with the incredible youth of Salt Lake City, so that they can help grow our culture, our community, and our economy into the future, and have a place where they can stay as they grow.
So, Mayor, if you can put them together in a youth city program, why can't you put them in school?
What do you mean, Tim?
I mean, if you're getting, if there isn't, I mean, if the risk is sufficiently managed in the youth city program, why not just operate schools?
Well, that's not my decision.
Okay, but do you have an opinion on that? It seems like
my opinion is based on the epidemiologists, both Dr. Dunn, Dr. Fauci, and none of whom are in Salt Lake City government. And just like every other city in the state, we do not have public health departments, and we rely on those partners at the county or the state level or the national level. And as a parent and as a mayor, I'm listening to their advice, which is evolving. And we saw that 6-foot to 3-foot change happen just last week. So I don't think that a mayor should be choosing whether or not the desks should be at a certain distance.
Aren't the experts now recommending that schools should be full-time?
That's what we're hearing, isn't it?
So are you pushing for that?
I'm pushing for the opportunity for families to decide how their students receive their education until they have a chance to be vaccinated. I have kids from 5 to 15, and there's not a vaccination on the horizon for a lot of our families out there. I've had my first shot, and I look forward to traveling again and re-entering society at that social level, but I'm really not going to be able to until my kids have been vaccinated and we can feel safe as a family. Until then, mandating that my kids go back to school because we don't have a choice, if we didn't have a choice for virtual, it's an incredible pressure on families with multi-generational households, families with different health pre-existing health conditions that may make them at higher risk. So I think that flexibility until our kids have been vaccinated is a really important opportunity. And I'm grateful that we have it in Salt Lake City.
Okay, I think we are at time, and we have covered a lot of ground, from housing and homelessness to police reform to how we can best support our schools and our students in those schools. Thank you, Mayor Mendenhall, for joining us. Sincerely, thank you for this robust conversation. We didn't get to all of the questions that came from readers. I'd be happy to share them with you following if you'd like to take a look. And we hope to do this again soon. George, any closing remarks before we break?
No, other than just thanks very much. This you reached out to us for this, and we appreciate that. We know that you're really busy, and we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Good luck.
Thanks, it's my
And
pleasure.
as you know, a year ago we had an earthquake and a brand new pandemic, and I was going to blame both of them on you just because you were there, but that wasn't fair. So, so good luck with it going forward.